These costs pass through to American businesses and families and contribute to inflation. And just a month after the president spoke about this at the State of the Union, the Senate yesterday passed overwhelmingly bipartisan legislation to reform the ocean shipping industry and lower costs for American farmers, businesses, and consumers. And additionally, this week, the Department of Justice announced that it successfully stopped a merger between two companies that make the cranes that move shipping containers on and off of ships at our nation's ports. The merger would have harmed American consumers by reducing competition in the supply chain and would have put our global supply chain at risk. And so these steps obviously are positive steps forward. I also wanted to note that today the Department of Homeland Health and Human Services and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services made important announcements in response to the Vice President's call to action to improve health outcomes. Beginning today, as many as 720,000 pregnant and postpartum people across the United States could be guaranteed Medicaid and children's health insurance program coverage for a full 12 months after pregnancy, thanks to the American Rescue Plan. Finally, for the week ahead to next week, I had one more thing after this. On Monday, the President will deliver remarks on progress made on his administration's trucking action plan to strengthen our nation's supply chains. On Tuesday, he will deliver remarks celebrating the success of the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid and extending affordable health insurance to millions of Americans. And on Wednesday, the President will address thousands of national, state, and local building trades leaders from across the country at the North America's Building Trade Unions Legislative Conference. Finally, as you know, the United States is delivering a significant amount of security assistance to Ukraine every day. Over the past few weeks, we have delivered more than $350 million of security assistance to Ukraine, which the Pentagon has described as an unprecedented pace. And we welcome the UK's donor conference yesterday and its announcement that allies and partners will provide coastal defense systems, which is something that President Zelensky has asked for and is something that President Biden discussed extensively with allies at NATO last week. More than 30 nations have now sent security assistance to Ukraine, thanks in part to the leadership of the President and our diplomacy. So we're going to get to as many people as possible. Darlene, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Jen. Welcome back.
Thank you.
One question on Russia and two quickly on two other subjects. Russia says that an apparent attack by Ukraine on one of its fuel depots is making it harder for Russia to stay engaged in the talks to end the war. And I was wondering what the White House thinks of this suggestion from Russia that Ukraine's actions are the ones that are potentially standing in the way of peace over there.
Well, we have seen those reports. We're not in a position to comment on the Kremlin's statements. I would note Ukraine has not made any statements or confirmation of these reports. I would also note that this is a war that President Putin started, a brutal war with Russia's forces continuing to bombard cities across Ukraine and commit terrible acts of violence. We've seen the people of Ukraine fight valiantly in the face of unprovoked Russian brutality, but there is one aggressor here, and that is President Putin and the Russian military at his direction.
Second, on Title 42, the announcement that it's going to be lifted on May 23rd. Can you talk a little bit about why the restrictions aren't lifted sooner than May 23rd, perhaps even immediately? People who want to come to the country to seek asylum will now have to wait 7 weeks to do so when the CDC says that restriction is no longer necessary.
Absolutely. Well, it has always been the case and continues to be the case that this is a health directive determined by the CDC. So let me start there. But I would also say that implementation of their decision requires an interagency process, specifically leadership of the Department of Homeland Security. I would note the statement that was put out by Secretary Mayorkas, and it requires the implementation of appropriate COVID-19 mitigation protocols, also scaling up capacity and scaling up resources needed. And so it was always going to be important to have an implementation period, and the timeline reflects that.
Last question is there any comment on the vote in Staten Island by Amazon workers to unionize?
Sure.
Becoming the first in Amazon to do that?
Well, the president was glad to see workers ensure their voices are heard with respect to important workplace decisions. He believes firmly that every worker in every state must have a free and fair choice to join a union and the right to bargain collectively with their employer. The Amazon workers in Staten Island made their choice to organize a grassroots union and bargain for better jobs and a better life. Go ahead, MJ.
Just in light of the fuel depot fire in Russia, what is the U.S.'s general position on potential future attacks by Ukraine on Russian soil? Does the U.S. believe that it is up to the Ukrainians to decide whether such potential attacks are justified, or does it generally believe that those kinds of attacks should be discouraged because they would be seen as being escalatory?
Sure. Well, given we have not confirmed or commented specifically on the reports from here, and neither has Ukraine, I'm not going to get into a future hypothetical. What I would just reiterate again is that this is a war of aggression by the Russian leadership, by President Putin, that has left millions of people displaced, homeless, has targeted civilians, hospitals, and other innocent people across Ukraine. We know who the aggressor is. That is President Putin and Russia. And beyond that, I don't have any comment on military tactics.
The president said yesterday that Vladimir Putin appears to be self-isolating, that he appears to have maybe fired or put under house arrest certain advisors. Does the U.S. have a clear sense of which advisors are currently advising Putin and who has his ear?
Well, the president was speaking yesterday to public reporting, so we don't have more details to speak to at this point in time. But I would say to go back to a couple of days ago and the information that was put out by the administration that was reflected, that came through our intelligence agencies, what we do know is that this war is not going how President Putin had planned, that his intention of winning a quick war, defeating the Ukrainians quickly, is not how it has played out. We have seen troops be demoralized. We have seen troops run out of equipment that they need on the Russian side, and that is clearly not what he had planned. In terms of who is advising him, I don't have more specifics on that front from here.